and welcome back to another episode of the Blakey Lock Show. This is the Week 4 college football preview. It is really the week we've been waiting for. It's an unbelievable slate of college football games. We're going to get into all the big games of the weekend. There's tons to talk about. And there's also going to be a special interview portion at the end of the show. Not so much an interview, but breaking down the Ole Miss Alabama game with Brett Merriman. Awesome guy to have on the show. Big Ole Miss fan, and that's an awesome game to talk about. So we broke down the whole game. So that's really good stuff. So make sure to listen all the way through to get that. Other than that, it's going to be an unbelievable weekend. If you can't tell, I'm recording this from a bed, the guest bedroom of my parents' house. It is my mom's birthday, so allow me to be the first to say happy birthday to my mother. So don't worry, I've made it clear that Saturday will be a day for college football. It's too important of a day, too big of a slate to be doing anything else. So let's just get into the games. I do have a couple picks I like on Friday night, starting with San Diego State +7 versus Boise State. Boise State's had a really tough start to the year. In their two FBS games, they've really struggled on offense. They really haven't been able to get much going. San Diego State is really tough defensively. They've had a pretty brutal schedule playing UCLA and Oregon State, two teams with really good offenses, so their metrics aren't great. But this team is always tough defensively. And Boise State is 120th in red zone offense. San Diego State, even though they've played two really good offenses, 53rd in red zone defense. So I expect them to keep Boise State out of the end zone, keep this game low scoring, and I think it'll be close. I think San Diego State should stay inside of that 7. Air Force -3.5. This line has already moved a bit since I bet it. I would still play it where it is. I would play it all the way up to 6, really. They're playing San Jose State. Air Force is off to a great start to the year. They have been fantastic on the ground, as they always are, but they actually lead the nation in rush offense. They've been amazing on the ground, and San Jose State is outside the top 100 in rush defense. And maybe more importantly, the Air Force defense has been really, really good. They wreaked havoc last week and picked up, I think, like 5 sacks against Utah State. So they've been really, really good. So I like Air Force a lot in this spot. But on Saturday, run through a few games that I like, and then I'm going to talk about the big games last. I played Kentucky -14. This has come down a little bit. I can't really tell you why. I still really like it. At Vanderbilt on the road, but Vanderbilt has virtually no home field advantage. Kentucky had a pretty weak out-of-conference schedule, and I think they just really haven't unlocked much on offense. They've been big favorites in all 3 games, and they've they've covered a couple of the games, so it's not like they've been bad, but they just haven't really had to do much. Going into this year, I was a huge fan of the move of Devin Leary coming in. I think there's still a lot more to this offense that we haven't seen yet. AJ Swan, the quarterback for Vanderbilt, super banged up, and he hasn't looked very good, even when he's been healthy and playing. So Vanderbilt's 0-4 against the spread. They just had to travel to Vegas, took a terrible loss, and now they're coming back after losing to UNLV. I think they're in a pretty rough place at this point, and they're just not a team I can back. If this is the week that they find something and get within this number, God bless them, but I'm going to keep fading them, and I think this is a good spot for Kentucky to just kind of wear them down and end up winning by 21 by the end. Western Kentucky +3.5 at Troy is another game I like. Austin Reed in this Western Kentucky offense is awesome. We saw them light up South Florida week 1 for 41 points. And then we just saw that South Florida defense hold Bama to 17 points. So I know that whole Bama thing's a whole nother conversation, but obviously Western Kentucky did something right in that game. Troy is 0-3 against the spread after losing outright to James Madison last week as favorites. Their defense is not the same as the Troy defense we've seen the last few years. It's been so impressive. Their offense has been virtually non-existent in their two FBS games. Western Kentucky struggled last week against Ohio State, but I mean the talent gap there, the physicality, athleticism gap is just massive. You can't really hold it against them. So I think Western Kentucky comes in Austin Reed will be too much offense here and get it done. In the Pac-12, I like UCLA +5 at Utah. This Utah team, Kyle Whittingham, Cam Rising, there's maybe no team in college football I've had more bets on, more money on in the last few years than Utah. I've loved this team, but rarely are they favorites. A lot of the time I like them. They're in coin flip games or short underdogs against the big teams in the Pac-12, and that's when I love betting on them. Here, the roles are reversed. Cam Rising is expected to play. I still think there's a chance maybe he doesn't. He's been expected to play the last couple weeks, or at least people thought maybe he could, and he hasn't gone. I do think he probably is going to play, and even if he does, um, there's always a chance he comes out shaky. I mean, he's coming off an ACL. He hasn't played yet this year, and this is a really tough matchup. Dante Moore, when he's been in, this UCLA offense has been electric. They've looked virtually unstoppable when he's really rolling. So I really like UCLA to come in this tough spot and beat Utah outright. So I really like them at the +5. Oregon State -3, staying in the Pac-12 at Wazoo. I talked in my Pac-12 preview. I'm a believer in this Oregon State team. I'm a believer in DJ Uwangalele in this run-heavy system that he can do what he was always meant to do. He can run the ball really effectively. And when they're just dominating on the ground, he can hit the few throws that he needs to hit down the field to produce a couple of big plays. Washington State's been really, really good to start the year. And I think they are a legitimately good team. But I think they've been maybe a little bit better than, I don't know, exceeded expectations for sure. And that's given us a better line here. And I think Oregon State, if you can get a 3 or less, is a great number. Couple money line parlays I'm playing. Maryland and James Madison. Maryland is playing Michigan State. I keep fading Michigan State. It was bizarre last week. People wanted to play Michigan State against Michael Penix Jr. He embarrassed them, obviously, 35-0 at halftime. It was an awesome game to watch. Probably my best call of the week last week. Was really fun. And I'll keep fading Michigan State. They're an absolute dumpster fire. They have nothing in the secondary, as Michael Penix proved last week, putting up 35 in the first half. In Talia and Maryland, that's what they do, is they create explosive plays on offense, downfield passing. And so I see no reason why they won't be able to do a lot of the same things Washington did in the first half. So I think Maryland wins that game against Michigan State. Then James Madison keeps rolling. They keep finding ways to win close games against Virginia, against Troy. They're just finding ways to win these games. And going up against Utah State, like I said earlier, talking about Air Force, Utah State got sacked 5 times last week. They had less than 60 rushing yards against Air Force. They really struggle in the trenches. And this JMU defensive front is legit Power 5 worthy. This could be a Power 5 defensive front. They're really, really good. I think they're going to dominate the line of scrimmage, and James Madison's going to be able to get it done. My other moneyline parlay is South Carolina over at Mississippi State and Texas A&M over Auburn. I think this is a really good spot for Texas A&M. I'm a big fan of Connor Wegman. They let me down big time against Miami, but I still have some belief in this Texas A&M offense, and I think they're going to be too much for Auburn. And same for South Carolina. South Carolina, it's pretty much been if Spencer Rattler can get time, he's looked really, really good, and he's made big plays downfield. I don't think Mississippi State is going to be able to cause them too much trouble in the trenches, so I think that sets up Spencer Rattler to be able to create some big-time plays, and South Carolina is going to be able to win this game at home, which is big. I am betting kind of one juicy moneyline parlay, a bunch of big favorites that I like: Oregon, Washington, Penn State, Kentucky, LSU, and Texas. These are all teams. Kentucky and Oregon, I'm playing against the spread. The rest of them, I think the numbers are a little bit inflated, but are all teams that I'm comfortable that they'll be able to get the job done, and that comes out to minus 109. So kind of a fun one to keep some action going throughout the day as long as it doesn't lose early in the day. But looking at the big games of the weekend, starting with Ohio State, Notre Dame. Ohio State -3, if you can get a -3, would be great. I think that's kind of necessary. If not, I would maybe try to pair them in a big money line parlay with a bigger favorite. Because I do think the 3.5 could start to get dicey. But I do think Ohio State wins this game, so I like the -3. I think they really did unlock something last week. I think Kyle McCord is without a doubt their best option at quarterback. And I think they're going to take care of business. I'm a big fan of Sam Hartman. I bet Sam Hartman a lot in his tenure at Wake Forest. I think he's really, really good. But I think this start for Notre Dame is just kind of this number has gotten to a point where you can't back Notre Dame. I think you have to trust that Ohio State is more talented. Their offense is going to be too much. And if Kyle McCord can go in and not be intimidated by this environment on the road at Notre Dame, I think Ohio State will have too much offense, and they'll get things done. For Notre Dame, this is their fifth game. They played week 0. And early on in the season, you talked about, is it an advantage to play in week 0 or not? Like, you get the rust off, but then teams have tape. Like, there's a debate back and forth, but we're kind of getting into the point in the season where if you haven't had a bye yet as a week 0 team, you're now playing your fifth game in a row, and they haven't really played cupcakes. They played Navy, which, even though it was a blowout, is always a physical game. They played NC State, who's a really, really physical team. They played Central Michigan, who, as far as MAC teams go, is one of the stronger teams in that conference. And it's really, for Ohio State, been Cupcake City. They played Indiana, but Indiana's terrible. So I think it's really been Ohio State who's had time to kind of rest and keep their guys healthy and be ready for this to be their game, to be like, all right, let's give it everything we got. Whereas Notre Dame's already had to show a lot. They've already had to work really hard, and I think Ohio State's going to come out on top. Um, the Ole Miss game against Alabama, I will be getting into with Brett. So make sure to watch that preview. But I am betting Ole Miss for 2 units at +7. 1.5 units on Ohio State, by the way. I should preface everything else I've bet has been a 1 unit bet. And then 3 units on Oregon, -19 versus Colorado. I would play this up to 20.5, even 21. If you can get a 20.5, which you should be able to, that would be great. I think this is the spot for Colorado. I mean, I guess last week was also the spot because they didn't come anywhere near covering last week. Really should have lost the game. Easily, they could be 1-2 if TCU doesn't throw those interceptions in the end zone. If Colorado State just manages the game a little bit better late, they pull off the upset. No, Travis Hunter is massive. He's been their best weapon on offense and has kind of tried to help cut the field in half for opposing offenses. Their defense is really, really bad. It's awful. Colorado State looked like they can move the ball effortlessly down the field against them. And without Travis Hunter, things are going to get even worse, in my opinion. There's no longer going to have to be anything in the back of the quarterback or the play caller's mind of like, let's not go that way at that guy. It's going to be, let's go wherever we want, basically. I think Bo Nix is going to be able to score however many points he wants, 50, 60, whatever. And I think Dan Lanning and this coaching staff and Bo Nix are going to be like, we've probably had enough of the Colorado thing. I think if you're a good team in college football, you're probably like, I'm tired of hearing about these guys. They shouldn't be the story, which I think they do deserve to be a story. It's been an unbelievable start to the season for them. But if you are a team that you're like, we know how much better we are than these guys, it's kind of what you get with Dion. I mean, he's going to do his thing, talk his shit, do his thing against other people, and people are going to want to do it back. And I think he's totally fine with that and knows that. And so I think opposing teams and Dan Lanning and Bo Nix are going to want to run up the score here. So I think Oregon's going to score at will, and I think they cover the big number. I'm also planning on betting Clemson against Florida State. It really pains me in my soul, but Clemson has looked better since the week one game against Duke. I know it's not been against great competition, but I do think Cade Klubnik and Garrett Riley have maybe figured something out. I think they're just weren't really ready for that Duke game at all. I think they're going to come out ready here. I think their defense is going to be really tough, and I think as painful as it is for me to say, I think they are still the best team in this conference. At home, if this game was at Florida State, it would be a different story. I think at home, Clemson finds a way to win, and then I think Florida State will get revenge and beat them in the ACC championship game. That's my prediction for how this whole conference falls the rest of the way. So I'm waiting. The 2.5-2 range doesn't really matter to me. So I'm waiting. I don't think it will, but if a 3 potentially pops on Clemson, I'll come in there. If not, I'm going to play it small on the 2 or 2.5 or wherever it ends up there. So I think that's it for my card. As always, you can follow me on the Action app at Blakey Locks, on Twitter at Blakey Locks. Anything that I add on my card, whether it be live, second half on Saturday, or just before a game kicks, that's the place to find it. And without further ado, here's my Ole Miss Alabama preview with Brett Merriman. Thanks for listening. All right, I'd now like to welcome on a very special guest from Washed Media. It is Brett Merriman. Brett, what's up?
Like, what's going on, man? Really appreciate you having me on, and excited to talk some college football.
Yeah, it's a huge weekend in college football. It's by far the best slate we've had so far. We're going to be talking Ole Miss, Alabama, as you're an Ole Miss fan. But it's an awesome slate. Notre Dame, Ohio State, all sorts of good games going on. But it's a huge game. It's I would say maybe the biggest game of the Lane Kiffin era so far in terms of just if there's a year that they can kind of go get it in the SEC West, this would probably be the year. Alabama's already lost a game to Texas. Texas A&M lost to Miami. Arkansas just lost to BYU. LSU lost to Florida State. Like every kind of big player in the SEC West has already dropped a game, and obviously it's not conference play, so it doesn't count towards that record. But like it's the year to kind of go and take it if you're Ole Miss.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, this is the closer we get to game time, the more it feels like this is the biggest game of Lane Kiffin's tenure at Ole Miss in year 4. And with the way the West is shaping up, and everybody, like you mentioned, sort of looks, maybe vulnerable is not the word, but at least looks gettable. It's kind of put up or shut up time. This is why you pay Lane Kiffin $9 million a year. This is why you entertain him, dangling or getting offers dangled and sort of looking at Auburn and looking at A&M. And so it's put up or shut up time. And, I don't necessarily like what Lane's doing this week with the trolling and the Taylor Swift lyrics and the castles crumbling and whatnot. It's like, you got to win this game if you're going to do that. But it's funny to say Alabama doesn't look like Alabama and Nick Saban doesn't look like Nick Saban, because if they went out and won this game 42-10 on the Bama side, I don't think anybody would be all that surprised. And then all of a sudden Bama's back.
Yeah, it's always a boogeyman. Like I went to South Carolina, so I'm kind of in that somewhat of a similar zone to like an Ole Miss, where it's like you have some really good years and you're like, man, I think we have like a good team here. But then you look at your schedule and it's like, oh, we have to play Georgia and all these teams. And it's like, even though we have a good team, it's like, what is our ceiling realistically? So like when there's a year that it's like, oh, maybe we can actually go get one of these guys, like you really have to go for it. And that's kind of been Lane's had a couple of those teams the past couple of years, like the Matt Corral teams, that it's like, oh, this team's really, really good. Then he gets into the game against Bama and it's like, just doesn't quite have it and just can't kind of take that next step. So like you said, it's like Lane is awesome. Like he's one of the most entertaining coaches in college football. Like he's so fun, both off the field and on the field. The way he coaches is exciting. And he's been criticized in the past for how he's kind of handled some of those big games against Bama. I think it was 2 years ago, which with Matt Corral, where like there was a lot of hype for them going into that game, and he went for it on fourth down like 6 times, and they went like 1 of 6 or something on fourth down and lost by 21. And it's like, oh, maybe if he would have been actually a little more conservative. Like maybe they could have kept it closer, but then also you kind of want your coach in those big games to like just go for it. Like if we're going to beat Bama, we kind of just have to go for it. So this year, where it's the closest, at least, I mean, the spread's only 7 points, the same that it was for Texas against Alabama, and they won the game. Like it's the closest it's been on paper. So it'll be interesting to see how he approaches it. If it's like, oh, it's just like another tough game where like we can just play our game, or is it like, oh, it's Bama, I have to kind of change my strategy?
Yeah, and you look at that 2021 team, that's probably the best Lane Kiffin team, and it's the worst performance against Bama. You look at the 2020 game, it was kind of a knockdown, drag out uh, uh, track meet, for lack of a better word. It was just punch, 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 punch. And then last year, a 6 point win, and Ole Miss has the ball to win the game. And, I'll talk about the Jackson Dart face mask, till the cows come home there. I think that should have been a potentially an even closer game. But what happens this year is I think you have the best quarterback in the game if you're Ole Miss. I think you have the best receivers in the game. You get Trey Harris back, no matter how healthy he is, coming off a knee. Caden Prescorn's a tight end you'll hear a lot about this weekend. This will be his first game of the season, coming off a kind of a plantar fasciitis cleanup. I think you have the best running back in the game. And where Ole Miss is going to get whooped is in the trenches. And that's what my biggest concern is. Their offensive line has not looked good once. Quinshawn Judkins has not gotten off to the start that anybody thought he would, and a lot of it is on the line. And I think Jackson Dart, kind of like a Spencer Rattler, sort of makes up for some offensive line mistakes and lack of physicality, because he is mobile enough, he's smart enough, and he knows the offense well enough to get his checkdowns or back up or just make a play. Like you look at the Tulane game a couple weeks ago, there was a free rusher coming off the end. And if Jackson Dart doesn't sidestep that guy on fourth down and make a Jackson Dart type of play, he's sacked, and Tulane has the ball to potentially go down and score and win the game. So I think, you have the better weapons, which is just kind of wild to say against Alabama, but they're still Bama. They still have the defense, and Jalen Milroe can still turn into, a stud quarterback every now and then and make a play that nobody else in the league can. So there's a lot of just kind of strength versus strength with the Ole Miss offense and the Bama defense. And then I think it comes down to the Ole Miss defense against a Bama offense that's kind of still figuring it out. And an Ole Miss defense that sort of plays the bend, not break. They're okay with giving up 28 points. It's just, can you score 35 this week?
Yeah, it's both teams have kind of had a weird start to the year because Ole Miss, like if you just went and looked at their three scores, like they've won all three games, they covered all three games, like they've from a which both of the last 2 weeks Lane has scored like a late score to cover the game, and maybe has not been as convincing if you actually watch the games. But at the end of the day, like Tulane, like that's a really tough on the road against Tulane. That's a really tough out of conference game to go win. So like no matter what, like you'll take the win. But and then Alabama obviously losing to Texas, and then the game against last week against South Florida was just like bizarre, where Jalen Milroe was basically benched. Some people are saying he's suspended. I feel like that would have become public, like officially, if that was true. I don't think he was suspended. I think it was just kind of a weird Saban, like we're going to beat South Florida no matter what I do. So I'm going to. Some people think it was like he was sending a message to Tommy Rees because Tommy Rees wanted Tyler Buckner, who transferred in from Notre Dame with Tommy Rees. Tommy Rees wanted him to be quarterback, and Saban wanted Milroe. So Saban basically, as like a troll to Tommy Rees, was like, "Yeah, go ahead, start this guy, see what happens." Because Saban knew he was going to be bad, and then he was terrible. Um, so I don't know. It's been really weird. Milroe is by far their best quarterback. I don't think after last week there's any question about that. So him starting is definitely the best move for Bama. But I mean, he proved in the Texas game, like, yeah, he can make some of these crazy athletic plays, but when they have like a 3rd and 6 and just need a conversion, like he can't make that like basic slant like that they need to like pick up first downs. That like Tua was like the best ever at making just those basic throws across the middle of the field. And that's when Bama was at their best. So I agree. I think Jackson Dart's definitely the better quarterback. Quinshawn Judkins is the best running back on the field. It's it's kind of the same thing with Quinn Ewers in the Texas Bama game, where Quinn Ewers had some question marks. It was like, can he make those big throws downfield when Texas needs a big play? And he did, and that's kind of why they were able to control the game. Jackson Dart is going to have to hit those throws because when we look at last time Ole Miss beat Bama, it was Chad Kelly, Swag Kelly, and Jackson Dart has like a bit of that in him where he can like improvise and like make a crazy play, and he's going to have to make a couple of those for sure. Um, but I think he can. I think it should be a really good game. I'm going to be betting Ole Miss +7. Saying I did with Texas too. I think I think Bama's just really vulnerable. I think this from what everything we've seen, you just can't trust that they're going to be able to score. Um, and like you said, the Ole Miss defense is definitely not on the level that the Texas defense is, but I think the Pete Golding aspect of the game is really interesting, where you have Ole Miss's defensive coordinator, who has been the defensive coordinator at Alabama the last couple of years, and he knows the inner workings of like how that team works and even how the defense works. Like if he's talking to Lane Kiffin about like, yeah, this is probably what they're going to try to do to stop you. Like this is what Saban would do in that situation. Like which Lane Kiffin knows too, obviously, but just not as recent. So I think they have every piece to be able to compete in this game and have a chance to win the game late. It's just when you want to beat Bama, it's got to be like perfect execution, start to finish.
Yeah, and there's no doubt. And the Pete Golding thing, I think, is a key piece here. It's going to come down to if Ole Miss can get off the field on third down. They've proven they can get to third down, and they've proven they cannot get off the field on third down. They do have 10 sacks through 3 games on the defense, and they have some guys that can play. They just don't have, like, if you're going to line up 4 hog mollies and stop the run, like if Bama wanted to just run all over the Ole Miss defense, for some reason, I believe that's going to be their game plan. Ole
Mm-hmm.
Miss hasn't proven that they can stop Tulane with the ball in their hand on the ground. Same thing with Georgia Tech. Haynes King looks like a great quarterback against the Ole Miss defense. And part of me is wondering, like, just, and this is probably the hopefulness in me, are they saving something? Are they saving certain packages? Are they saving certain personnel groupings? Probably a few, but not enough to really make a huge difference. But if you have any sort of setup that screams that Ole Miss is going to play Alabama closely, it's this season. Just combined the offense with the Pete Golding element, with the sort of the lane, the confidence element. Ole Miss is finally getting some sort of studs. They're not just playing with these 3-star kids that are playing above their level. They're playing with 4-star, 5-star people. Watch number 4 on defense this weekend, Suntarian Perkins, true freshman, number 1 player in the state of Mississippi last year. Alabama wanted him, and he stayed. And NIL obviously is a huge part of this new age of college football, and probably part of the reason Alabama is not the Alabama of 10 years ago. But if there's any year for Ole Miss to win and sort of win comfortably, I can't even believe I'm saying that. It's this setup that we currently have. And if you were to tell me, like, if 4 outcomes, Bama or Ole Miss close and Bama or Ole Miss big, I see every one of those scenarios. None of them necessarily would surprise me.
Yeah, and I I agree that Alabama's game plan is just going to be kind of run the ball down their throats, just try to use their advantage in the trenches, Jalen Milroe's running ability, just try to use all of that and just uh, less possessions is better for Alabama, I think. Just try to shorten the game and especially with these new clock rules, just kind of try to suck the life out of it a bit. And which is weird because normally you think Alabama would want to just go like, we're better, just go take it to them. But that's not really the case anymore for Alabama, at least until they have some suitable quarterback play. Um, so I think it's going to be really interesting. And like you said, it's like not only could Ole Miss win, like if Ole Miss ends up winning by 2 touchdowns, like it wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world because of what we already saw Texas do. And like we were saying, Texas definitely is better defensively. than Ole Miss, which makes a big difference. They're better in the trenches. Um, but in terms of like skill positions, like Ole Miss is as good as anybody. And like with Texas, I was talking about this with Dylan, your coworker, not the week of the game, but we did a preseason episode talking about Texas and the Big 12. And him on that episode, I was like, no, if you, I think Texas is going to beat Alabama in that game. I was telling him that on that episode because I was like, Texas is really, really good, one, but also like Alabama has some real issues. Like they're not Alabama anymore. And of course, Dylan was like we were saying earlier, Dylan was like, yeah, but it's Alabama. Like you just are always going to have that on in your head. But at a certain point, it's like, I mean, and we've seen it with a lot of teams this year, like with the NIL thing and transfer portal, like the gap is just closing between these Alabama, Ohio State, whoever else, Georgia, even last week against South Carolina didn't play very well. Like the gap is starting to close on these teams because guys can go get like Lane can go get guys they couldn't get before because it's like here's $250,000, like whatever. Um, and so I think Ole Miss has a really good chance, and people are always going to be like, yeah, it's Bama, and that's always going to be in your head. It's Nick Saban, but things are different. I mean, Clemson losing week one to Duke, like that was insane. And again, same as the Texas Alabama game, the Duke Clemson game, like it wasn't a fluke. Like Duke was just a better team start to finish and just kind of dominated them. And that's the same thing Texas did. So I think we're in a new era where you're always going to be scared going against one of these big dogs, and they obviously have a ridiculous amount of talent. But I don't see any reason Ole Miss can't kind of just take it to them offensively and be the more aggressive team and win the game.
There's no doubt about it. And what'll happen early is we'll know this game's headed for that kind of sort of boa constrictor game plan. If Alabama's just saying, let's get 4 yards every rush, beat the Ole Miss defensive line depth down with their superior physical talent on the Alabama offensive line. You know, they haven't necessarily shown it this year that they're a cohesive unit yet, but they are just bigger and stronger than anybody Ole Miss can line up on the defensive side of the ball, maybe outside of Xavier Harris, who's a 6'8", just 365-pound monster, but you're going to wear him down over 4 quarters. So that's my biggest concern is watching the Bama running backs who looked great last week. It kind of that was their offense, was the running game. Just beat down the Ole Miss defense, 4 yards a carry, getting those 3rd and 2, carry for 5 yards, 3rd and 4, carry for 6 yards, just kind of backbreaking runs that keep Ole Miss's offense on the sideline. And then the new clock rules, you're absolutely right that that's not to Ole Miss's advantage, and Lane Kiffin has been very vocal about that. But then again, you try to, if you're Ole Miss, that's probably what you're most concerned about as well. So you dial something up to see if you can't figure that out and put the hands in the ball of Jalen Milroe, make him beat you through the air, and we'll see where
Yeah.
that goes.
Yeah, I think you have to. And I think, like you said, I think we'll know pretty early on, like what this is going to look like because, and especially talking about if that's going to be Alabama's game plan is to like shorten the game and run the ball. If Ole Miss can get out there and score an early touchdown and take an early lead, like that will totally affect Alabama's ability to just run the ball and kind of grind it out. Because if they're playing from behind, they'll naturally have to be more aggressive. So I think it's really a big part of it is going to be who can go set the tone early. If it can be Ole Miss kind of running up and down the field, like getting a score or two early, or if Alabama gets the ball first and, like you just said, like runs the ball 4 yards a carry, takes 6.5 minutes and scores a touchdown, then it's like, oh shit, maybe we're in big trouble. So I think we'll know pretty fast. But I think regardless, I think it will be a close game. I think Alabama probably will get a couple drives like that where there's just nothing you can do about it. But I think Ole Miss is going to be able to create a lot of big explosive plays too. And so it's probably going to come down to, can Ole Miss convert one of those 4th and 2s that Lane wants to go for? And can they pick up a big stop? And the two quarterbacks, I mean, I think it's really interesting. I think Jackson Dart is definitely more talented, but this is going to be the biggest game he's ever played in on the road against Alabama when his team has a really good chance to win. And then Jalen Milroe, after getting benched or whatever happened to him last week. Obviously, he's going to have a lot to prove. So I think whichever quarterback plays better, as like simple as that seems in football terms, is going to be the difference.
And I'll give you one more X factor to watch out for. The kicker for Ole Miss, Caden Davis, perfect this season, also including knock on wood when I say that, but also including a 57-yard field goal at Tulane. The kid just he kicks the ball just comes off his foot differently. He's one of those guys that kicks extra points like they're 50-yarders, just kind of mentally preparing for that scenario. So I think it could come down to a leg like that. And you look at Georgia, South Carolina last week. I mean, if that game was closer, Georgia's got 2 missed field goals that could have, kind of set the tone early for them, and they miss them. So if somebody misses a field goal at Alabama, whether it's Ole Miss or Bama, I think because the game is going to go to the way we think it's going to go, especially with Bama running the ball all over the place, shortening the game, those kicks are going to be important. And can Ole Miss get points? And they've gotten points on every one of their games, first drives. And so is that still the game plan? They've been winning the coin toss and receiving the ball. You don't see that anymore these days. So they want to get up early and force the other team to change the game plan. And that's kind of what that's the first thing I'll be looking for, right? Is that first drive on either side, what kind of tone setting? Ole Miss has been really good on script. Then they go into this second quarter lull, even into the third quarter, and then have just poured it on the last 20, 25 minutes of gameplay each game. So that's been the Ole Miss formula so far against lesser competition. And I think that if they try to do that again this time, they will not be able to catch back up. So it's going to be one of those things. Can the defense hold up? Can they get off the field on third down? Can Jackson Dart make plays, especially with his legs? Can bring those third and fours? Are they going to spy Jackson Dart? Give the middle of the field up? There's so many cool questions for this, all kind of leading up to a very exciting game. And Blake, I got to be honest with you. I have a wedding on Saturday,
Oh
4 o'clock.
no.
4 o'clock Eastern. There may be some phone under the seat kind of thing. I'm not in the wedding, so I can shield myself nicely, but it's my first time experiencing that with a game of this magnitude. I'm a little nervous.
Yeah, I was at a wedding last weekend, or I guess like 2 weekends ago. Luckily for South Carolina, it was a Furman game, so I wasn't like too freaked out. But I was there for the Alabama Texas game, and I cared about that a lot. So it's tough. You gotta be sneaky. And at a certain point, it's like if you have a fall wedding, you're accepting the fact that certain people are gonna be locked into the phones at certain points, and if you have an issue with that, then you gotta get married at a different time. Um, but I'll give
Exactly.
a final score prediction. I'm gonna call the upset. I'm gonna go Ole Miss 31, Bama 24. I think they win by a touchdown.
I like it. I like it. I gave a prediction on Too Much Dip the other day. Just a little plug there. The sports podcast at Washed Media. I'm going to change my score. I think the Bama defense is going to play better than what I said. I'll go. I'm going to go 34, 31. Ole Miss gets the win. I'm still going to say Caden Davis kicks a field goal to win it with very little time left on the clock. 34-31 Ole Miss. Go Rebs.
Yeah, I'm excited. I 2 years ago, the game we're talking about where Alabama or Ole Miss was, I think, 14 and a half point underdog in 2021, lost by 21. At the time, that was the biggest bet I had ever placed in my life was on Ole Miss plus 14 and a half. And it was just one of the worst days of my life. I was at the bar with all my friends and like told them, like I made all of them bet it. I was like, this is it. Like I know this is like the game. And somehow they still actually had a chance to cover late in the game. It was 21-point game and they had the ball with a chance to backdoor the 14 and a half. But really it was never close. So this is redemption for me. It's redemption for Lane, for everybody. This is the game. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you doing this. Do you want to let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Blake. Check us out at Washed Media. I'm on the Mail In podcast myself. We have a couple of shows circling back and Too Much Dipping, one of them, but just the whole Washed Media network. if you're a fan of Blake's show, chances are you'd be a fan of what we're doing over there. So appreciate you having me on, Blake, and go Rebs this weekend.
Yeah, it's my circling back is my favorite podcast in the world. I do the Love Island Boys for the Love Island fans out there. Always plugging that. So, yeah, thanks for coming on, and maybe we can do this again sometime.
Awesome. Absolutely, man. Thank you. Appreciate it. And good slate of college football this weekend. Looking forward to it.
All right, that was my preview with Brett Merriman. Make sure to follow him and Wash Media everywhere. Circling Back podcast, Too Much Dip podcast. Make sure to listen to all of those wherever Brett is featured. And yeah, thanks for listening to this. Please make sure to rate, review, subscribe wherever you're listening or watching this. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe. Please like the video. Leave a comment with your favorite play for this weekend. All that stuff means a lot to me. If you're listening wherever you listen to your podcasts, give it a rating there, subscribe there. And yeah, appreciate everybody following along. Let's make it a big weekend for the best college football slate of the year. Cheers.